Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. We have a great episode that we have been waiting to have, wanting to have, willing to have. Yeah, I'm really excited about today's episode. We are joined by the remarkable, the lovely, and the intelligent Jase, Emily, and Dedeker from the Multiamory podcast.
It's such a great conversation.
I'm very excited to have this conversation because, the timing is such that they're releasing a book. It's a book filled with tools. You know how I like tools.
We need tools.
Tools
are awesome.
I like tools. You're a little scared of tools.
Oh, well, I do have some generational trauma around tools.
You do. Those are like the hardware type, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Like
and you're usually
and whatnot.
Right. So these are relational tools. So the folks at Multiamory have a fantastic podcast. If you haven't caught it already, listen to this episode and then you're going to want to go check out their podcast. It's great. And this conversation, what I really enjoyed was setting our listeners up to hear how these three humans have negotiated and figured out and created and crafted ways, what I think of as technology, to do their relationships better. And it's not just about doing polyamory better or doing open relationships better. It's about doing relationships better, doing it better as in getting the results that we actually want.
Yeah.
Which I love that. And I'm excited whenever anyone is putting out tools that are designed to make relationships work better and feel good. Yeah. And the other thing that was cool for me is listening to them talk. I was reminded that we all change all the time. All of us change all the time. And often when we're talking about non-monogamy, I get this sense that people imagine when you leave the monogamous paradigm, when you leave behind the mindsets of it and the default setting of it, that means automatically you're always going to be non-monogamous or you're always going to practice polyamory. But in fact, we're changeable creatures and our life circumstances, our bandwidth, our wants, our needs, they can change. And we may find that practicing monogamy is what we want or what we desire for a period of time or forever. And I just love that they are living that reality.
Yeah.
That
living that reality and sharing their wins and learns with us, their finds. Yeah. And exciting is the right word. Knowing that there are things out there, that there are people learning and growing and sharing their experiences and saying, here's a thing to do in this situation. Try this.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Because there's the thing, there is no one answer. I love working with people on coming up with answers to their relationship struggles. But at the end of the day, there is no one answer. There's trying on a bunch of stuff and figuring out what works for you. So yeah, I'm going to encourage you to get the Multiamory book that's coming out. It's available for pre-order right now while you're listening to it, or if you're listening to it even a few days after this airs, it will be at your doorstep quickly. So the link is in our bio. And in the meantime, listen to this fantastic episode with Jase, Emily, and Dedeker, who created the Multiamory podcast in 2014 to raise awareness, provide approachable resources, and to combat the stigma faced by people in non-traditional relationships. We've certainly seen that stigma up close.
For sure.
And so glad that podcasts like theirs, like ours now, have a space to be.
Yes.
Today, with hundreds of episodes under their belts and millions of downloads around the world and a rapidly growing community, Jase, Emily, and Dedeker are dedicated to offering practical advice and communication tools that are grounded in the latest relationship research. They also have guest experts and years of professional experience that add into their great podcast. Multiamory has been featured in numerous publications, including NPR, Vice, Huffington Post, Oprah Daily, Cosmopolitan, and Elle. In addition to that, they also have done national tours. They presented at the Google campus in Seattle, and they've been keynote speakers and presenters at numerous conferences. And they're just lovely humans. So with no further ado, listen in. Well, this is a total pleasure. Thank you so much, Dedeker, Emily, Jase. Thank you all for joining us. It's the full cadre from Multiamory. And I love this. And it makes for a complex system here, which I think is perfect. What better metaphor could we have for the complexity of relationships than to have multiple people talking into microphones at once?
Oh,
Thank you.
definitely. Yeah, it's been kind of this funny thing in that, like, so the whole reason that we're here is to be talking about our book, and our book has multiple agents as well. Like there's been all these little kind of like funny kind of multi-partner relationships that have cropped up even around just this project.
The universe is funny that way.
It will have its way.
Oh, you want multiple stuff? Here you go. Have a bunch.
No, and it was the same thing with my first book, and they were my first literary agents also, that like when they wanted to sign me, it was like two agents at the same agency that wanted to sign. And so they were like, this may be weird. I know this may be weird, but I think we're both going to represent you. And like, this is how we're going to work it out. And like, maybe this is weird, but oh, wait, I guess actually you're probably used to this. Maybe this isn't weird to you, So it was kind of funny that also my first book had two agents, and then it's kind of been the same theme that's carried us throughout.
Multiplicity as a theme. I think like that totally works.
Indeed.
In the psychology that I study, multiplicity is a common word. Like we use that word every day to describe everything. And often I notice that other people who are coming from what I think of as the mono imagination, not about monogamy, but like their whole imagination is based on monotheism. Like they struggle with just how much multiplicity there is threaded through everything. So it's actually one of the reasons I love even the name of your podcast and the name of your book, because it just invites curiosity around multi what now? So yeah, let's start off talking about like, you just wrote a book. It's going to be hot off the presses by the time people are listening to this, or just about to be so. So if pre-order or get it in your cart right now, we'll have links. Tell us about the book.
Sure. So the book is a collection of communication tools that we've developed over the 9 years of doing the podcast. And basically, we reached a certain point where we asked our audience, what's the next project we should do? And we put out a little poll amongst our community, and a book was the thing that everyone wanted, specifically because they wanted some more concrete examples of the tools and things that they could reference more easily than having to go find, this particular part of a podcast episode or read our transcripts or something. And then also that they wanted something that they could share, that they could gift a book to someone who doesn't listen to podcasts, or just someone else in their life who they want to be able to reference the same tools. And so we went through a lot of different iterations with what the book was going to be. And what we landed on was picking out the 6 tools that we've created for communication in relationships that have been the most impactful in both our own lives, and then also the feedback that we've gotten from listeners and with clients, and people that reach out to us and say, I'm a therapist and I recommend this to all of my clients, kind of seeing what is it that stuck, which is a really cool advantage to writing the book after doing the podcast for this long, is that we have some of that feedback of, this is what's worked, this is how we've tweaked it. We've worked with our audience to get feedback on these things over the years, so that then we could compile all of that into this book. And we also have an extra chapter where we have other tools too, that are other ones we created that didn't deserve a whole chapter, or other ones that we reference a lot from other people as well. But I'd say the focus of it is kind of on those 6 main communication tools that we've created over the years.
Okay. My favorite part about this is that, one, it's concrete, and that you leaned into that, because it's so easy when relationship talk starts. It's so easy to be like, well, if we get too concrete, we might seem prescriptive, or we might people might imagine that we have to do it a certain way. And I've been listening to your show for a while now, and you come across to me as anything but prescriptive. And instead, I'm hearing that it's just that it's a toolkit. It's place where people can turn and say, if our communication isn't working, this is what we should do. Is that how you're hoping people will use the book?
Yeah, we talk so often throughout the course of the book that take what you like and then leave the rest. And it all is really customizable. So even within something like our radar format, which is a monthly check-in tool for people to get to go and really like have a state of the union for their relationship on a monthly basis. But maybe monthly doesn't work for you. Maybe you decide to do it bi-weekly. Maybe because you're really busy, you do it every 2 months or something along those lines. We also have a list of things that you talk about throughout the course of the radar, and those might be really specific to each individual as well. We have things that we like to talk about all the time, but maybe for someone else who doesn't have kids, for example, maybe someone who has an ailing parent, they're going to be talking about that on a monthly basis, things like that. So we really, really urge the listener and the reader to customize whatever they want for each tool.
You so your radar technology, your tool, I gotta say, I love the tool approach. Like here's a toolbox, and also here's some guidance. I think it's just such a wonderful resource to put out there. And in that monthly check-in, I was wondering if you have any particular techniques or things that you like or suggest for reducing resentment buildup. So I mean, I read your descriptions, and it all, yeah.
It's not too far off from what we have been doing. I mean, I wish we'd had your book 14 years ago when we opened up, because that would have saved a lot of pain. But yet resentment, and it sounds well and good to like say, I'm going to have a radar conversation, but we've noticed that can kind of collect like dryer lint.
Partially because the things that I resent aren't the ones that I bring right up. I keep them in the background and let them build up the resentment.
Yeah. So I think that resentment can be a collection of many different things. But as we're talking about it right now, it's kind of like two main things come to mind for me. I do think the foundation of resentment comes from any dynamic where we feel like something's a little unfair. And this can be in very big macro cultural ways. So for instance, like resentment, if you're, in a heterosexual relationship, like resentment about how your other partner's gender tends to move through the world in particular ways, and the ways that some things are easier for them that are harder for you because of your gender. Or kind of broad resentment around there being an income disparity, for instance. So there can be these deep, I think, the sense of unfairness around those things, or it can be like little things, right? Where, oh, you really wanted me to text you as soon as I got home from a date, but then like you took 2 hours to text me, so I do think like areas where there feels like there's been some unfairness, or we're kind of being given a bad break, as it were, can really fuel resentment. And then another part of it is the backlog part of it, the snowballing, the problem backlog, right? So it's like these moments of feeling into that unfairness with not having an outlet for discussing it, not having a place where we can work it out, not feeling like that's being understood by my partner. I feel like those are often kind of the special magical formula that can really keep resentment alive and going in a relationship. And so with something like a radar, it can be hard, I think, whether it's a radar or any kind of relationship check-in, it can be hard to start that practice when you've already been in a relationship for several years, right? It's not impossible. In fact, most of the people that we've spoken to that are using a radar did start incorporating a relationship check-in into an already established relationship, right? And so it does mean there is going to be some backlog to work through. There is going to be maybe some time to make up for in acknowledging the small and big ways that you're feeling into a sense of unfairness, right? And like trying to see if you can generate some mutual understanding of your respective positions on that, right?
Yeah.
So, the relationship check-in, it's not, or honestly, any of the tools, none of these are going to be the magic bullet for something like resentment, but we're hoping that it's like this at least can open a crack in the door, right? It can start to slowly change the trajectory of this moving object that is your relationship into a direction that feels maybe like resentment isn't something that characterizes your feelings towards your partner, for something where you feel like there's an open channel with you and your partner to talk about when those feelings come up, right? So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. That's
So this actually, I forgot to write this question down, but I'm going to add. So I think the reason our method aligns so much with Radar, and I do recommend Radar to people all the time because it's based on agile principles, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yes.
Ken is a software architect. So that's his mode of moving in the world. And so we built our agreement processes based on that idea that iterative nature of checking in is just, it just works. And I heard you use the phrase backlog, and it reminded me of how when we introduced that concept, there was a lot of backlog. We had an abusive relationship. Our start, Ken has fully acknowledged, it was an incredibly, not just asymmetric, but it was abusive, and there was a lot to dig out of. And I give him a lot of credit for like sitting here and over again acknowledging this, but
it is the way.
right.
It's what there is to do.
There, like, we're still, so 14 years, and the first 6, there was such intense asymmetry that then there were years where that backlog would have to get dealt with over and over again. And I remember early days, I thought he would get frustrated and bail because, in fact, it couldn't be dealt with all at once. It wasn't a once and done. There was no intensive process that was just going to say, okay, now we're healed and it's not a problem. If we wanted to make this partnership work as part of our overall non-monogamy, then we were going to have to allow ourselves to be in an ongoing, like untangling of that backlog.
It's the work of continuous improvement.
And so I
Yes.
appreciate that the use of that phrase is a reminder to me that how far we've come, but also that it's normal to have that backlog. It's not, there's nothing inherently wrong with the relationship if you have a backlog of issues.
And also, I think with things like resentment, there can be a little bit of this sneaky side to it where sometimes you don't even realize it's there until something brushes up against it. Right. So even in my current relationships where I'm having regular check-ins and regular radars, that, like, I don't know, sometimes some sort of random happenstance will suddenly make me realize, oh, what I'm feeling activated right now or triggered right now, I'm realizing this is attached to actually 3 other instances, these like maybe small instances, but like they do compound over time. Right. And ideally, having something like a check-in means, okay, I know I have a place, a time where we've decided ahead of time, this is what we're going to do. We've decided ahead of time that we're going to show up, hopefully as our best selves, calm, rested, fed, all those things, able to dedicate our attention and our focus to this conversation, where hopefully then I can be like, you know what? I realized probably why I got so mad the other day was because it brought up X, Y, and Z memories. And so, like, I just connected those dots. And so let's just talk about that, right? And your feelings on that, my feelings on that, right? Instead of it being, I need to wait for that to happen 10 more times and it's a big explosion. And then we're really having to pick up the pieces.
Brilliant. That also, though, brings up the fact that relationships change over time. And so you can have these processes in place and they may be functioning really well. And that doesn't mean that the relationship doesn't wind up changing. And here the 3 of you sit, having written a book together, having this amazing podcast, which is just a wonderful resource for people. And your relationships have changed. And yet here you are, like, negotiating.
yes.
I can barely even know where to begin with. What is this like to write from different relationship structures, different human experiences? Start wherever you like, but please give us the insider view. How does this go?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a gift, really, to get the opportunity to do it with 2 people that you know so well and from so many different facets of what they represented in your life over such a long period of time. Because, yeah, Jase and I were initially monogamous. Then we opened up. We met Dedeker, who was dating someone that I started dating. The 4 of us kind of became a quad, which broke up. And then Jase, Dedeker, and I were a triad, which broke up. I became monogamous. And then Jase and Dedeker stayed together. And, through that time, we were creating and sort of shepherding this podcast into the world from a very young age at that time. And it is sort of remarkable that we were able to keep it going through all that. And I think it is just a testament to the bond that we have and how much it mattered to us to keep going. And I think a lot of people, pod fade is very much a thing, and podcasting wasn't very big back in 2014. And so we really could have abandoned it so many different times. But for whatever reason, we decided it was important enough and that what we were putting out there meant enough, hopefully, to people that we were like, we have to keep doing this. We have to keep going. And that is something I think that kind of culminated with this book. And now the book hopefully will continue to go out in the world and do that for other people as well.
I guess, I mean, so we've told this story many times over the course of, running the podcast. We've been telling this story a lot recently as we've been doing more of these book interviews. And I think what's occurring to me right now is, the way that we talk about relationship shifting and changing, we're so used to talking about it in these very black and white terms of like, oh yeah, that romantic relationship ended, or we broke up, or now they're my ex, or it all fell apart, or things like that. And some of that can be true, but I'm occurring like with the three of us, it's like the relationships never ended. I think that's the thing, is there was never a period of, oh, I'm going to go away and stop talking to you. Although sometimes that can be a really good thing for recovery, but there was never oh, I'm going to pretend like you don't exist. Oh, I'm actually going to break off this relationship and then evaluate, do I want to come back to it? Like with the three of us, the relationship just never ended. It just changed the way that we relate to each other and how we communicate with each other. And so for me, looking back, it still feels like there's been this big through line of kindness, of respect, of compassion, of showing up even when emotions are high, of still choosing to communicate with each other, even when we don't feel like it, or even when we're annoyed or having a bad day. And so, yeah, I don't know. There's just something about that that's occurring to me right now, of just this through line that's kept things going. There wasn't ever really like a break, even though the relationships did change many times.
Which goes to a theme that comes up a lot in the book and also in our podcast, about just that relationships are relationships, whatever label they have, whatever you put on them, we're still humans connecting with other humans, whether that's your family member or coworkers or friends or people you're having sex with or romantic partners or whatever. And so it's a joke that we've brought up several times, is that if we're talking to someone in the press and we want to, get some attention, we might say something like, oh, I'm doing a show with my ex and my partner, and we do this podcast every year. But in reality, that's never the way that I think about my relationship with Emily or Dedeker's relationship with Emily. It's just, these are these two really important people in my life who I spend a lot of time with every week and I'm very entwined with, and that I love a lot and care about. And both of them are, beneficiaries on my retirement plan and life insurance and things like that. But I think that people see the X thing and they just go, oh, wow, that must be the way you think about it all the time. And it's just this like, no, that's honestly never what occurs to me unless I'm explaining it to someone. I go, oh yeah, I guess she is my ex. Weird. I just don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
Right. So the label X all by itself, I often struggle with it. Like, what does that mean when we're talking about relationships that can be customized? Like, one of my primary tenets is that relationships can and should be designed by the people in them for the people in them. Awesome. But which doesn't mean you couldn't have an ex, because there might be somebody that you decide to completely.
Oh, I got plenty.
End.
Don't even worry. I got plenty.
But there's also like a million words that I feel like we haven't invented for all the new ways that our relationships might morph.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people don't need labels for that, but I happen to love labels. I thrive with labels.
Do you have a good one for this type of configuration?
Yeah, I don't. But it's making me think. I think we need one. I think we need one because I think we need a host of them, because I notice that when I work with people, they're often coming out of very long-term monogamy. So 15 to 35 years is not uncommon for my clients to be experiencing their shift, right? So they often need new words to help them imagine what the other possibilities are, because sometimes I am faced with a moment where they ask me, well, does this mean that our relationship will end? And I say, and I have to help them with their imagination. What if it doesn't end, but it changes? And what I notice is the lack of language causes a big hiccup. It's really challenging. Like, but I don't want to be an ex. I don't want to be an ex-wife. I don't want to be divorced, like, because these words only mean one thing because of how they're used in a generally monogamous culture. But I don't even think that they actually help us understand monogamy terribly well. They're sort of unilateral. And they have connotations and denotations. I'm just stunned by how much language there is left to develop around
Right?
this.
I love being on a podcast with you because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna say something. Okay, I got a plan. I'm gonna say something as soon as you're done.
And
No,
then I
that's what I was
say
gonna say. No,
Sorry.
I was gonna say that too. Okay, I was gonna say that. But
I've worked my
but it
mind
is.
reading very, like, really high now.
You've been
so-
together a while, so
Yeah.
And the people coming in with this monogamous mindset, then like if you're shifting to a new relationship, like the whole point is one has to end for another to begin.
Mm.
So what we need is language around transformation because something's going to change.
Right.
And that's why I watch you do that all the time. Helping people build transformation into their imagination,
Right.
the potential for things to change and not just end.
I really like the fact that the two of you are coming back around to imagination. It makes me think of, now this isn't a tool that's in our book, although we may reference it perhaps, but the relationship anarchy smorgasbord, which you did an episode about a few months ago. And I absolutely love this tool. And just for listeners who aren't sure, I mean, first of all, you can go ahead and Google it. There's a
we'll
version
link
that
it too.
the version that I prefer is called like the non-escalator relationship menu. That's the one that I think has the best graphic design, but I digress. But basically it's, taking all these little building blocks that we tend to lump together into one type of relationship, right? So thinking about the building block of presenting as a couple on social media, introducing my partner to my family, having sex or not, sharing what happened during our day, saying I love you, using pet names, all these things, and just sort of presenting those almost like a buffet, right? Almost like a menu. And the whole idea is that this is a conversation starter where you sit down with someone to be like, what are the building blocks? What are the things we want to put on our plate from this buffet, right? And so, yeah, when you're talking about imagination, I find that that is an area where people kind of need help because we're just kind of given these labels of like, is it your soulmate? Is it your living partner? Is it your wife? Is it your fuck buddy? Is it quote unquote casual, right? That comes with this preloaded set of these building blocks. But then when we separate that out, it means that our options for customizing suddenly exponentially grows, right?
Right.
Beyond just what a label can contain. And so I find that that's a tool, and it being kind of laid out in that way, I found has been the most helpful when I have been working with either clients who are monogamous or just want to be monogamish, or maybe like, I don't know if I'm going to dive, both feet first into this whole polyamory thing. Again, just like knowing that there's like options, and it's all the stuff on the menu is stuff you're familiar with. It's just picking what you actually want with this other person.
Yeah. So I have a process that I work with called the minimum viable agreement. And it's based off exactly that. It's based off all the domains that are laid out in the relationship smorgasbord. Like it helps people open up their imagination but while also giving them a container to like, okay, and when they see that buffet, often people are like, whoa, I was not prepared to have so many options. So that's exactly why I think people turn to tools, because the same goes with a relationship check-in or with the Triforce of communication. If like using even the word communication, it's too big and it gets overwhelming. So by having these tools, I like that you also selected 6 of your favorite or 6 of the most predominant, because it is overwhelming to think about overhauling a relationship all by itself and then to do so in a way that really taps into the imagination instantly. I mean, I breathe multiplicity, and even I am like, my heart rate is raised just thinking about all the potential. So I love that. What other tools are in the book?
Sure, yeah. So of the 6 tools, radar is actually the last one. That's the one that we kind of build up to, because to have a really effective monthly relationship check-in, it helps to have these other communication tools in place beforehand. But so the first one that we start with is another one of our most commonly talked about ones, possibly the one that we use the most often in all of our day-to-day lives as well, which is the Triforce of communication, which is basically a tool for doing kind of a shorthand and more easily meta communicating about what it is that you are looking for in a conversation. Essentially a slightly more advanced version of the whole, do you want advice or not? Like that's maybe a starting place. And this kind of goes through some other scenarios like that, but basically breaks everything down into three things. It's just sharing, wanting support, or wanting advice and problem solving. And we give a lot of examples and show how you can use it if you both know, oh, I want Triforce 2, please, versus let me explain to you what I want because you don't know this tool, or let me ask you what you want because you don't know this tool. And then we go on to chewers and spewers, which is about how we internally or externally process our thoughts and our emotions as we're working through those. And Emily and I are both chewers, and Dedeker is very much a spewer. And so we could talk about some of our personal examples.
Opposite. Yeah.
Opposite.
Oh, sorry, the other way. Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, gosh.
we're spewers and Dedeker's a chewer. Yeah.
Yes, there we go. Let's see. The next one is microscripts.
Love
Yes,
it.
microscripts is another one that we use a ton. And that's basically finding little shorthands to break problematic patterns that you fall into. It's like those little annoyances and things that can become resentments. It's like, how can we get ahead of that and stop it right as it's happening or before it happens? And so microscripts are a tool for doing that. And then we have one called Repair Shop, which is after you've had some kind of an argument or a conflict, how can you come back together, after the fight part is done? How do we come back together to talk about that and grow from it? So this isn't just damaging our relationship, but we're actually taking the car into the shop and getting it fixed up better than it was before. And then we have one on boundaries and a tool about how to explore your boundaries and how to create those. That's a term that we've seen get really I say overused and misused and sometimes abused as a term to justify some bad behavior. So we really explore that in that chapter about how boundaries can be really effective and really positive in your life as well as the other people in your life. How to improve things for all of you. And then all that leads up to the radar chapter. And then of course our extra tools chapter at the end where we cover a whole bunch of other really cool things.
Okay. So the reason I wanted you to just lay it all out is I think it's great to normalize the fact that we're going to need multiple tools and multiple strategies. And that doesn't mean we have to apply all of them all the time. Like it really is about having them be available. And one of the ones that stands out to me is it's the Repair Shop, because I feel like when John and Julie Gottman's work really took hold and everyone, or at least in my world, everyone learned the phrase rupture and repair, it sounds great. And so I hear especially long-term couples talk about oh yeah, we had a rupture and repair, but they can't often describe what it is that they're doing. They're using a lot of old habits to hold it up and they don't really know. So when they open, when something's new, when they're trying to explore with somebody new, all of a sudden it exposes the fact that they don't really know what goes into repair. They've come up with something that works with a particular person, which is great. And now what? So I'm loving that you got into that.
Yes. And thank you for calling out the Gottmans. That, their work is very inspiring to us and also often really frustrating to us as well. And, I did the Gottman training. It's the primary modality that I use when I'm working with couples and with, I've translated some of their work into working with triads as well. And it's so true. And this is not just about the Gottmans necessarily, but I think part of the multiamory philosophy and part of the reason why we do this silly thing of turning everything into a acronym or turning everything into easy to follow steps is with tools, with concepts, with the practices that are going to make your relationships the healthiest and help you have good communication. I really strongly believe this shouldn't just be something that we have to have facilitated by a therapist or translated by a therapist. I think it's wonderful if you can, doing work, especially if it's couples work in therapy with a great practitioner, is fantastic and amazing. And also, if you don't have the time, energy, finance, or you're not in a good geographic location for that, like I don't think people should just be left high and dry, not knowing what actually goes into something like repair, what actually goes into something like making sure that I actually understand my partner actually understands me, right? And so, yeah, so I'm just kind of like zooming out from that's sort of the philosophy behind this whole book and behind our whole show, right? Like there's a reason why we're going to academic studies, but trying to find a way to translate that into like, okay, how does this actually affect our lives? What's the actual takeaways here? How can we remember the takeaways? How can I have a silly acronym so that when my blood is boiling, I can at least remember the acronym and have a place to start instead of just starting by like yelling at you at the top of my lungs, right? Like that's kind of my whole thing is it's about like trying to empower people and it not having to be something where it's like, oh, we have to go to a therapist or I need to sit down and read 20 of the most recent relationship books and also try to get my partner to read them as well. And then that causes more resentment and another fight and things like that.
Yeah. This aligns for me a lot. I feel the same way, and this is how I practice. I don't think it's reasonable to ask people to remember how to do things that are so outside of what was modeled for them when they were children, to just remember that when we are activated.
Right.
So I'm always
Yeah.
looking for the acronym or the cutesy name, and I'm like, it helps, and I only do it because it helps me. I couldn't remember these things because when I'm activated, I go into full attack mode, and while that might look like I'm in a place of power, I'm very definitely not. I'm actually feeling incredibly weak. So I love that the tools have these clear names. Also,
Definitely.
that it lets you have conversations with people and get on the same page faster. I mean, speed matters, especially, I don't know. I mean, I know we say it all the time, love is infinite, but calendars aren't. It literally saves time to say something like, I'm looking for Triforce 2, or let's do our radar, than to try to piece that whole conversation together with fresh language every single time when we really don't need to.
Yeah. And I do think that one of the many reasons why people do turn towards a couples therapist or an individual therapist is getting that sense of safety of like someone's kind of holding the container and someone is helping us play the game correctly, right? And I think that's great. But if you can take that and like again have your own structure that you can remember or have a customized structure that works for you, and we both know we're on the same page about that. Like we both know, and it's a weird metaphor, but it's the best I got right now. We both know the rules of the game. We both know how to engage in this game that we're going to play right now, which is about repairing. I think there's so much of our nervous system and our brain that can then relax, right? Instead of, oh my God, how are you going to respond to this? I don't know. Should I say this? Like, should I de-escalate? I don't know. I don't really want to escalate because I don't think that's fair to, like there's so much that I think can be calmed down when we have a structure, a tool, an acronym, something to hold on to in those moments.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for writing a book that provides a collection of those kinds of things, because when we're upset, activated, however you want to call it, our imagination, our creativity, those things are suppressed. And just being able to pull up something that's easy to get to, good. Now I can take a step that we've already talked about and decided. Ideally, I mean, sometimes I read, I can do it from my side. I don't need you necessarily to understand exactly what I'm doing. I'm not going to be saying Triforce number 1,
right?
But I can say what's behind it. And I do. I feel just reading it, I felt calmer.
Well, it was interesting because we both looked at each other several times reading the copy, like, oh, this is what we already do. And I knew that was true because I'd listened to enough of your podcast to know that there was a lot of alignment. And it was genuinely comforting to be like, oh, right. This is actually, there are a growing number of people operating on a explicit basis and making these things known. So fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to ask this question. It might be clumsy. I don't know. But the only downside I can see is that when we name these tools and I really believe that the three of you have done a great job of democratizing yourself, like making yourselves accessible and not putting yourselves on a guru platform. And I'm always working on that myself because it's hard to be in business and not guruize yourself.
Yeah.
But the tools themselves can almost be, I have seen people weaponize them through
Sure.
like saying like, I know this tool, and so this is the right way to do non-monogamy, or this is my way of doing this is correct. And I would love to hear you speak to either how you would love to see people change that, or anything that you have to say around that topic.
Yeah, we definitely say over and over again throughout the book and on our show, don't weaponize this shit, because it is a thing that happens so often. I think even if people go to couples therapy, that can happen. You just learn how to, weaponize things in a nicer package than you would have otherwise, which is really challenging. And gosh, I mean, I think intentionality, understanding that you both are on a team working towards trying to better an issue that is, outside of just the two of you. It's like, here's this issue, let's try to fix that, as opposed to, I have to be combative and win the conversation or win the argument or win the fight against you. And here are these tools that I have to do that better. It's like, no, we together are tackling this thing that keeps coming up that we want to change. And I know that it takes so long for people to really get that, I think, in their brain and understand, we are against this thing over here. And so that's why we include things like the homework assignments and stuff to enable you to do it over and over again and practice, because so many of these things require that kind of practice to make it really rote and in your body and in your mind and in your hearts.
Right.
And along with our kind of thing that we repeat over and over again of don't weaponize this shit, another one that we say a lot is it's okay to break up, which is one that a lot of times people are a little bit like, what? When you say that. But what we mean by it is that the other person doesn't have to be some terrible, horrible person in order for this not to be a good relationship for the two of you. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in that thinking of, oh, but they're not terrible, so I couldn't break up with them. But you both might just not be compatible, either because you just have very different beliefs and values about things, or maybe because they're just not willing to do some of this work with you and meet you in the middle. Like, some of the tools are great that you can use them one-sided, but for a lot of them, they work a lot better if both people are contributing, and a relationship can't be maintained just by one half of it. And so that's something that we just like to reiterate as well, that if you're trying these tools and it's just making you feel terrible, I mean, one, sure, you could throw our book in the garbage and maybe it's our fault, but also you could think about this could be that we're doing our best to try to make something work that just doesn't, that just isn't. And that's not a failure of either of you as people. That just might be this relationship isn't meant to be in this shape or at all.
Something that we also sprinkled through in some of our homework prompts in the book is examining why you're drawn to this particular tool, maybe why you're drawn to the book at all. And if you're feeling some sort of motivation, like, oh, I really want my partner to read this book and they're not, or honestly, something that I've had to work with clients is sometimes I really, really, really want my partner to do a radar with me and they won't, or they give this excuse, or it keeps not happening. Right. And I often have to work with people getting down into, okay, so why is it a radar? Why are you drawn to this? What are you hoping to get out of this? Like, what are the things that you are longing for from your partner that you're hoping that this tool will work to unlock, right? And let's think about what's on the other side of this perceived obstacle, right? Because if it's, okay, what I want is I want to feel safer in my relationship. I want to feel like my partner is also pulling equal weight to care for our relationship. I want to feel like we have some special time where we get to check in and talk about the things that are going right in our relationship. Then I'm just like, then do the things that help facilitate that, or maybe just directly ask your partner for that instead of getting too tightly attached to it has to be this tool, it has to be a radar, it has to be all these steps, right? So that's just one example of, I think sometimes if someone gets too attached to a tool, or they're using a tool in a really weird or aggressive or abusive or kind of, I always use the word bludgeoning, like a bludgeoning kind of way, there's something underneath that, right? And it's probably not necessarily about the tool itself, but about like what you're really hoping to accomplish or what you're really wanting. So, I mean, that's a deep well to get into, and that's all very individual and going to be unique to the circumstances. But I think that, and again, this is also not unique to our tools. Like we've heard people complaining about a partner weaponizing NVC, nonviolent communication against them.
Yep. Yeah. The
Right?
one thing that you're supposed to not like.
Exactly.
Nonviolence is in the word,
yeah.
but absolutely. I've seen that happen in session.
Yeah.
Anything can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's just like getting curious of like, if you're the one who like really, really, really wants your partner to use this tool, or you're really frustrated because your partner is not using it in the way that you think that it means, like, then it's getting curious about, okay, what's actually underneath that. Or if you're perceiving that your partner is the one, it's getting curious about what might be underneath that for them, and maybe asking more of those questions as opposed to kind of getting hung up on what the tool is or how we're going to use it.
Yeah. I'm appreciating the way that this it invites curiosity into my own motivation first. Like what is it that I want? Because it's so easy when we're talking about relationship tools to turn the attention to why won't my partner do this, or why aren't
Yeah.
they doing that, or why won't my metamor do this or do that? Like it really doesn't. If every time we do that, we're missing the opportunity.
Yeah, I really hope a lot of these tools offer the chance for the reader to reflect inward, because it is looking at things like, what is my history around this particular problem that we keep having? Why do I keep getting triggered by this? Why do I feel so resentful towards my partner because of something that was said? And is that inner work that I need to do, or that I need to express to my partner so that they understand why this is so challenging for me? I think, there's so many journaling exercises and stuff like that as well, because all of it is internal work as well as just working on the relationship itself.
Yeah. That the question that comes up for me is I, when I invite somebody toward that curiosity, and they get to the spot where they're like, why is this? Why do I want this? Often what they are faced with, and I'm guessing some people listening to this will think, Jolie has said this to me in session. Is this something you're actually trying to achieve? Or do you want your partner to magically make it happen? Right? Are you doing the work? Or are you just going to say it over and over again, hoping that they will somehow wave a magic wand, they will fix it for you? And it happens so often. We have 7 kids, so we have been through the ringer of
Wow.
like raising children.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And what it means is we've seen a lot of kids go through a phase like this. It's a totally normal phase to go through, both when they're really little and then again when they're teenagers, where they're just so angry that they have to do the work to say, learn how to read, or so angry that they have to do the work to learn calculus. Like they want somebody to just make it happen. And so for me, I feel like it is a sign that we've reached an adolescent moment in our growth, right? Like a little moment of like, oh, this is where I have to dip into being uncomfortable and not good at this thing yet, or I'm not going to get there. And in relationships specifically, we have the opportunity to say, no, it's them. They can do this for me. So
Yeah. How insightful though, because in our adult relationships, all that child parent stuff still comes up, right? It is this interesting relationship where we're adults, but we do kind of want to be cared for. And there are moments where we want our partner to kind of be just that unconditionally loving parent figure. And sometimes that can be great. That can be really healing in small doses. And then there are the times where it's like, no, we got to be adults now, or I have to be the adult now, or I have to just stand up and say what I want, or I just have to ask for what I want, or I just have to make it happen myself. So yeah, that's really interesting insight of thinking about those adolescent moments in relationship.
Yeah. for me, it's a reminder that I get to ask my partner for support. Like any given person I might be with, if I dip into one of those moments where I'm feeling my own discomfort, I can still ask them for support, but there's a big difference between asking them for support and asking them to change what they're doing so I will feel differently.
Mm.
And that to me, I mean, so our kids are now between the ages of 16 and 23. So
Wow.
we've also now seen what happens when they grow up and when they outgrow that phase, and all of a sudden they really do take responsibility. And I'm noticing it in my own relating. Like I'm always reparenting myself inside my relationships, and sometimes I'm feeling real grown up and I don't need any of that support. And other times I need to ask for it, but learning ways to ask for it. I'm thinking about how like the Triforce actually is a brilliant way to be able to ask for the kind of support, even if it's in reparenting, even if that's what you're doing and you're doing it consciously, great. Like there's space for that in there, in the support, but it's about making it conscious rather than the unconscious acting out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You brought up something that I think goes back to what we were talking about, language. So yeah, so the kids, they grow out of this adolescent phase. Do they grow out of it? Because like, so for that moment, that part of them has moved into another way, but then, a year, 6 months, half an hour later, they've got, it comes up in some other way.
When you're 56, you're not
or
done.
you're
Sorry.
56 and
Oh,
there's
no.
adolescence coming
Yeah.
up, and yeah, so what is the language for that? Because we grow through it, but that doesn't mean it's not
Yeah.
coming back or we won't run into it again, something like
I'm
that.
shocked. Yeah, it just how many people I hear it. I work at a restaurant 2 days a week, and hearing little conversations from people who are older than I am, and they're all having the same relationship bullshit. Like every single person is, it never ends.
Yep.
And it's really shocking to me. I'm like, shouldn't, if I'm looking up to someone who's older than I am, shouldn't you be doing better than I am now, or than I was in my 20s? Like what's happening there? Where's that disconnect? So anyone, I mean, all of us go through it and probably misstep, even those of us who are so seeped in this every single day. We all fuck up.
Yeah, sorry, the cycle continues.
Yeah.
Right.
Indeed.
We don't learn all lessons at once, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's also why they're tools,
Yeah.
not
Yep.
like thresholds. Like, okay,
Yeah.
otherwise we could just have a bunch of thresholds that we would pass through. We'd have rites of passage. Like, I have achieved communication. Thank goodness. Wouldn't
Yeah,
that be nice?
exactly.
I wish.
That's not how that works. So I want to wrap up, and I want to make sure people know. So obviously get the book, but how else should people connect with you? I know the book is available everywhere, all the everywheres. Where else can people connect with you all?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to go to start is just multiamory.com. And basically you can find all the other stuff there. Also conveniently, Multiamory is pretty easily searchable on any search engines, in your podcast player or on your, on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, you'll find us that way. But I do want to bring special attention to our site, multiamory.com/book, where we have the information about the book specifically, but also we have a couple live events coming up. So if you're listening to this before these events, so we have one on May 24th in Seattle and then one on May 30th in Los Angeles. So if you're in one of those areas and it's not sold out yet, go to multiamory.com/book and look for information about getting tickets to those.
Fantastic. Right. I just want to say thank you as well. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for modeling being in transformative relationship, like a lot, like growth oriented relationship that gets to become rather than be. And I just really appreciate it. And for continually doing this work, even when it's taxing to say the least, but I'm sure, I'm sure it's put you through the stuff. And I'm so grateful that you show up and do this, all of you, each of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to be here and have this conversation. Thank you for your wonderful questions.
Yeah, thank you.
There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship.
But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliequiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com. And find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.